spending,
My apologies.
that may be mine. We're going to hear all kinds of things. My dogs are on the porch. I put my chickens up, so I don't know what you might be hearing in the background, but yeah, I've been dealing with, a lot of things today, that is very timely, and what we're going to talk about tonight: authenticity, and who is native and who is writing, and it's quite contentious. But so anyway, what I wanted to do was I'm going to put up my PowerPoint for you, and I'm going to go through some pictures. And in my career, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and it's a really long time. It just seems like yesterday that I was slaving over my doctoral dissertation, which I wrote on a typewriter, by the way. We did not have internet. But many of the things that I wrote about when I first started out are very timely today. And all of these things that I wrote about, but even when I was a graduate student, are still hitting us Native people right in the face right now. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me see, where is oh my God, where is it? Hang on. Well, this is awkward. Okay, I thought it was, let me find it. I've been giving so many talks. Actually, I've given like 24 talks recently, so I'm kind of okie doke. So here it is. So show present, let's see, from current slide. Okay, here we are. Okay, so Catherine, if you could mute me so you don't see my face, so that I can turn my light on. Is that possible? So that,
Yep.
yay.
Your picture showing. I've got your
Yay. Okay,
Yep.
good. All right. Yeah, it wasn't a very good picture anyway. I've been doing Zoom since COVID started, and honestly, I still have not figured out how to do my lighting. I mean, I'm sitting in the dark. I mean, it is dark outside. So what was illuminating me was my bathroom light, and a little halo light, and clearly that was not enough. But so anyway, I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to go through this very quickly, and it might seem like a kind of like a laundry list. But all of these books and all of these things that I've written 19 books in my career, and everything that I have written has affected me personally. And if it hasn't been me, it's been my family, it's been my community, it's been my friends, it's been, a neighboring tribe. The first book that I wrote was Cultivating the Rosebuds. And this was about, Cherokee boarding school. And we hear an awful lot about residential schools in Canada and finding remains of children. Well, what's interesting about the Cherokees is that the school that they created was to acculturate their own children to the ways of white society. And these women did not learn anything about Cherokee culture whatsoever. It was opened in 1851. They learned about Shakespeare, chemistry. They were taught German. It was really a rather fantastic school if you're going to look at it academically. But what really, I zoomed in on this school, and this is what we're looking at today, is the mixed blood, full bloods, traditionalists, progressives, who is more native than the other person. And so this is extremely volatile. And even though this came out in the early 90s, it's still very pertinent today. And then, I went to Bias in the Academy. How is it that we write about Native people? And this Natives and Academics stemmed from, because I used to edit the American Indian Quarterly. I did that for 9 years. And so
Devin,
I had a special, yes.
Devin, I hate to interrupt. Are you showing slides right now?
I am. Can you not see them?
They're showing as blank screens right now. We can see the mouse, the cursor.
Can you see that?
No. I did see your screen earlier.
Oh, okay. Let me, okay, I see what's going on here. Hang on. I know what's going on. you cannot start the video because the host has stopped it. So that's me. You know what? I think it's because you stopped my video.
Okay.
Can you see this?
Has started screen sharing. Yep. Um, oh, now I see it.
And so start my video. Oh, and here I am.
Oh,
This is the problem. Let me see. You might just have to deal with my light because I'm looking at my notes. Did you see this one? Can you see anything?
we can see this one now. It's cultivating the rosebuds.
Yes. But I just didn't want you to see my bright face. And I think when you turn me off, that might be. Can you see this?
Yes.
You know what? I have a different light. Let me see if I can use this. I might not even need it. I mean, honestly, let me see. I can turn this off. Okay. So is this okay?
Yes.
Can you see this?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. I think that's the problem. When you stop my video, then you turned off the whole thing. Okay. Natives and academics. This came out of, when I was editing the American Indian Quarterly. And what I did a call for papers, and I had 200 people chime in about the problems that they were facing in the academy. And I thought, we really need to write a book about this. So hence came Natives and Academics. And this book, even though it came out decades ago, it's still being used today. And then years later, we realized that, wow, we need a sequel to this. So Indigenizing the Academy, when Ryan Deloria and Elizabeth Cook Lynn and other people just, said, yes, we're going to chime in. And so I did this with Angela Cavender Wilson, and she goes by Wazia Taman these days. So based on those books, and these are a little bit out of order, but based on the horror stories of Native people in the academy, including myself, the things that I went through that I've written about extensively, I came up with a novel called Document of Expectations. And this is a murder mystery that is set in a fictitious university up in the Northwest. And it's in an anthropology department. And this actually was pretty easy for me to write, because I'm going to say this more than once, that as Native writers, we write what we know. We write about our experiences. We know our places. We know the people that we have dealt with. We know our environment. And so I was able to bang this out pretty quickly because of the things that I went through. And so many of the characters that are in this book are actually based on the people that I know. People may chime in and say, hey, are you writing about me? And it's like, what? You mean you think that was you? I'm not going to tell you who was who, but yeah. So Document of Expectations really talks about bias in the academy. And that book is going to pop up here in a minute again. So American Indian Stereotypes and Realities, I just am always these crazy stories about Native people, and hey, if you're a Native person, you get your tuition paid for, you get free trucks, all that kind of stuff. And so I thought, I need to write a book about this. So this is the 25 most common misconceptions about Native people. It went through 7 printings. And this is probably the book that sold the most of everything that I have ever written. And it was really written for K through 12. So it was very well, and I was very gratified. It had a lot of pictures, and I think it educated a lot of people. One of the next books that I did was on my father-in-law, Henry Mahisua. And Mahisua is a Comanche name, and Comanche in Mahisua in Comanche means first to fight. So hence the title of this. And so Henry, is a very interesting person because he did go to World War II and he fought in World War II. He was a Marine. And so he had a lot of really disturbing stories about how he was treated as a Native person in the military. You know, people would call him chief. And so they had some stereotypes about him. But again, this was a very, very personalized book. And I really loved doing it. I had hundreds of hours of his stories that I transcribed. So, Repatriation Reader, Who Owns American Indian Remains? And this book, even though about 20 years ago, still being used today, because this was the first book that came out about the, I guess, the desecration of American Indian burials and skeletal remains, and taking a sake. It says my internet connection is unstable. Well, I hope you can still understand me. I'll keep going. This is, it's about what do we do with all these museums and university archives that have all of these items that need to return them to tribes. And the reason this is very timely is my university, the University of Kansas, less than a month ago, students discovered that there are remains, Native skeletal remains, that are stored in the same building as the Indigenous Studies program. And so this has caused a tremendous uproar. It's like, why are they still there? Why were these not returned? And so what has happened is people have moved out of that building and have gone someplace else. So it has really caused a huge displacement. So again, things happened a long time ago, they're still right here in our face. And again, Document of Expectations, this murder mystery in anthropology, it deals with American Indian remains, and people were murdered over them. Indigenous American Women, Decolonization, Empowerment, and Activism. This was also a popular book that I understand that people are still using, which is very interesting. But it chronicles, we're talking about Native women's traditional roles, how those were usurped, the American Indian movement. In particular, I focus on Anime Pictou Aquash. And this is very timely because there are a lot of calls to release Leonard Peltier. And probably if any of y'all are interested in Native issues, you have seen these things. They're calling on President Biden to release him. But Anime's family, whom I know, are very disturbed about this because Peltier was one of the people who was very well aware of how and when Anime was going to be murdered. If you want to know any more about that, just Google it. It's all over the place. And I was the first person to interview Anime's daughters. But again, a lot of what happens in the nonfiction book, Indigenous American Women, shows up in Document of Expectations. So again, I write what I know. This is bias, misogyny, men trying to figure out ways to turn you upside down and sideways so that you will not have any power, and to get you out of the academy, to try to get you to just quit. And I wasn't going to do it. So I really do chronicle that. And I still hear from a lot of women saying that this book helped get them through their master's and doctoral programs. And then, God, So You Want About American Indians. This is a weird cover. But I always get a lot of questions about, well, what can I write about? What should I write about? How do I write about? And so I just came up with this one day. I thought I was going to write this guide. And so this has ended up kind of being a handy little thing. I probably should update it, but I don't have the time. So we're going to go back to Repatriation Reader. And we're going to hit here, Roads of My Relations. And this is the first novel that I wrote. And honestly, I have never taken a creative writing class. I've never even taken a class in Native Lit. And so when I was 40 years old, I thought, I wonder if I can write a novel. Could I write a novel? I have no idea. Let's see if I can. And so we were having a garage sale when we lived in Flagstaff, Arizona. And while people were coming and going, I sat on the steps there in the front with my notepad, and I started writing about my family stories. And, I'm a nation of Oklahoma, and I have family stories going back to before the 1830s, before they were forcibly removed, courtesy of Andrew Jackson's Indian removal policy. And I remember the stories and all the things that I was told and the horrors and things that happened. And so this repatriation reader really hit home with Roads of My Relations, because those people who died on the trail, they were just buried there on the trail. If you were Muskogee Creek, they went on their own separate trail where they cried. The Muskogee Creeks were not buried in the ground. They were traditionally, they were always buried in a hollow tree, or they were put up in the branches or something. And so I have always wondered what happened to all those bodies, because oftentimes it was wintertime and people were buried like in the side of a creek bank. Well, it thaws and then the water rushes through in the springtime. And so somebody's going to get a hold of those bones. So I address that in this book. So this was, incredibly personal book. I cried a lot when I was writing it. And so along the lines of Roads of My Relations came another book shortly after, Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens. And this really talks about native foods pre-contact, and what is it that what we ate, what were our gardens like? And one of the overarching themes, Roads of My Relations, is the family garden, because my family had a garden back in Mississippi, and it was patterned a certain way. And then when they were removed to Indian Territory and they went to Kulichaha, there's a place in East, the family started the garden again. And they did it in the exact same way, the same rows, the same plants as they did, when they were still in the East. So this garden, I'm unstable again. I know that, but okay. So this garden has now come to present day. And so I modeled the gardens that I have in my backyard here in Kansas after the gardens that my ancestors had. So Catherine, when you were talking about, my food stuff and how do I incorporate it, this is right there. I mean, this is the foundational element, really, I think, of every culture. You got to eat, but the food and the cosmological stories associated with our eating, this makes us who we are and the environment where we live. So then came Choctaw Crime and Punishment, and my ancestor Charles Wilson in 1884 was murdered by a rival political faction in Indian Territory. And Choctaw Crime and Punishment, this appears in all of my books. Post-Civil War Indian Territory, and for those of y'all who aren't familiar with it, Indian Territory became the state of Oklahoma in 1907. It was incredibly, fantastically violent. And the novel True Grit by Charles Portis, this takes place in post-Civil War Choctaw Nation. And so this is where you get all of these wild and crazy characters, and it's Belle Starr and Cherokee Bill, the Dalton Gang, everybody runs through here. And people were just killed here just every day, and it was horrible. And it was particularly horrible for women, which is a whole nother story. But my ancestor was a victim of this. And so I take a look at how the tribe is fractured between political parties. And this continues to today between Christians, non-Christians, dark skin, light skin, those who adopt the ways of white society, and those who are determined to keep Choctaw culture. So this is switching gears. And so this seems kind of insane, doesn't it? Because I'm sorry, my attention is about that long. And so I am all over the place with the stuff that I write about. But after I wrote that book, here I go with this one. So, University of Oklahoma Press asked me to write about Indigenous food sovereignty. And so I put together this anthology. And within this book, we've got issues of climate change, soil health, seed saving. How is it that we are going to survive, global warming and all the catastrophes that are upon us? And it isn't just Native people. It's everybody. We're all facing the same problems, and all you have to do is go to the grocery store and see that. I went shopping today and was appalled at how much everything costs. But this again is one of my great interests, and I have a backyard with various gardens. I've got raised beds, I've got a greenhouse, I've got just in-ground stuff. And then I flop back to this, which is Ned Christie. And Ned Christie, I've been giving a lot of talks about him. Just recently, I went to Miami, Florida to talk about him. But Ned Christie was a Cherokee Kituah who was accused of killing a U.S. deputy marshal in 1887. He was innocent, and for the next 5 years of his life, he was hounded. And finally, in 1892, a posse blew up his house with dynamite and killed him as he ran out. He's sort of like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But the reason that I was interested in Ned Christie, and I did get permission from his Cherokee family to write this, by the way, was because when I was researching my ancestor who had been murdered in Choctaw Crime and Punishment, I would see stories about Ned Christie in the same column right next to him. And so issues of Ned Christie and the tribal issues and debates and factionalism, again, shows up in my novels. So then we go back to this, Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens. I showed you the previous cover. So almost 15 years later, I revised it. And this is now 70% revised. So if anybody's interested in Indigenous foodways and teaching it, I have a curriculum guide in the back of this. Recipes are expanded. And I've got a whole bunch of, in between all these books that I was writing, I also wrote articles about foodways and histories of foodways and backyard gardens and things like that. So again, I will write about one thing, but I still have others that are still near to my heart, and I'm going to write about those as well. So we get to this slide, and I guess I should look at the time, see where we are. So I wrote Roads of My Relations back in the year 2000. And then the next one I wrote was Document of Expectations. And I wrote several children's novels that I did not put up here. They're adventure stories. One took place at the North Rim of the Grand Canyon and Big Bend National Park. And so I love that series. The next one's going to be at Glacier. But they're survival stories with this really cool little heroine. But the next book that I wrote in this series, and the heroine of these novels is named Monique Blue Hawk. And Monique Blue Hawk is the first female Native detective who was created by a Native writer, me. You see other detective stories out there, but none of them have been created by a Native writer. And I want to say that these 4 books are now optioned for film and streaming. And I'm working with producers right now. They're developing the pilot and then the series synopses to submit. I think they're going to go to Netflix. So I don't know. We'll see what's going to happen. But I want to point out that all of this stuff that I write about, and this is what I mean by you write what you know. And well, I've written about racism and stereotypes and genocide, treaty abrogation, health disparities, environmental destruction, poverty, ethnic fraud, missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. All of this stuff is really depressing. It's depressing, and I teach about it. I teach about it. I research about it. I write about it. Yet I know how most of these stories are going to turn out. turn out when I write the nonfiction books. You have a definitive end. You can't just make up an ending if you're going to write a nonfiction. But when I write fiction, I have the opportunity to create my own ending, like a happy ending. And so this is what I have done. And it's also a stress reliever to write fiction because I can write dialogue and I can create situations. And I should say with the Hatak witches within my tribe and other tribes, we have a lot of entities that are of concern to us. And many tribes, when we hear an owl hoot, a great horn owl hoot, we know that that owl, an opa in our language, that is a harbinger of something bad's about to happen. It's either going to be somebody in your family is going to die, or you are, or something bad's going to happen. Also within my tribe, they are seen as witches. And so what I did, because this is part of the stress relief, and I know that a lot of people horror. So in the Hatak witches, we have a murder in a museum archive, and the villains are the murdering, shape-shifting opas, the owls. And so Monique Bluehawk, being the enterprising detective that she is, you know, she embarks on this journey of how is she going to solve this issue with these opas. And so it's kind of violent, and I know it scared a lot of people. Like this scared me, but you know, this is the kind of stuff that we think about, right? But one thing that I also want to mention, with all of these books that I write, I also write about the natural world. I'm really big on descriptions of the plants, the trees, the flowers, the smells, the weather. You know, it doesn't do, you know, when I read or listen to a book on Audible, I want to hear about the environment that they're in. And I'm very interested in what's going on around them, because you've got insects that make noise and birds that make noise. And so I'm always wanting to insert that. So if you read any of my stuff, you see that I've got the natural world inserted into everything in here. And this brings us to Dance of the Returned. This just came out. This is November, right? Okay, so this just came out in September. And so Dance of the Returned is the latest Monique story. And it's kind of a wild one. It's a story that takes us into all kinds of possibilities, supernatural elements. But also, what would you do if you had the opportunity to go back in time and to change things? Would that make a difference to our present day realities? And so I'm really proud of this one, and I really love it. But the first book or story, I guess, if it does make it onto streaming, it's going to be Hatak Witches, with elements of Rodents of My Relations in it. But I've got a lot of characters that I truly love, that are in Dance of the Return, that are going to show up there. So I guess what I want to say here is, when we talk about honesty in the way that we write, it's because you know and you understand your culture. Number one, you spent time there, you've lived there, you know, and you understand it. And a lot of people take issue with the Tony Hillerman books. And I taught high school in Grants, New Mexico, when Hillerman was just started out and was a big deal. And I had Navajo students in my class, and they would come to me and they'd say, I hate that book. I don't like, he shouldn't have said that. He shouldn't have written about that. And they're still saying that today, but yet people still love the Hillerman stories. And so his widow, Anne, I guess, is continuing on. And so we just got another treatment of what is the one with Zahn McClarnon, whatever it is that, I mean, just came out. I mean, it's not terrible production, but my feeling is that if the tribe tells you you shouldn't be doing it, you should not do it, and then just drop it. But people just continue to carry on. I am really concerned with problem solving, strong role models, proactive females, accuracy in describing place, histories, and our culture. And a lot of people will argue that fiction, well, that's not real, so why can't we write what we want? Well, you know what? We know that's why it's called fiction. But what we write about is based on our realities. And that is the difference between, I think, somebody who knows and understands the culture. We know what we can and cannot write about. Like, I would never in a million years reveal ceremonies, for example. But some people have done that. And this is a real problem. I also think that, considering the thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women and young girls and boys, it's not just females, we have a responsibility to project positivity and strength and accuracy about who we are and who we can be. So anyway, I guess I would say, I would sum this up, and then we can ask for questions. We all need stories, don't we? We need entertainment. We need relief. I mean, when I run, I go out between 7 and 10 miles every morning. I have hundreds of books on my Audible thing that I listen to. And I don't listen to Native Lit because I don't like trauma stories. We call it trauma lit. I don't like that. I listen to goofy romance, and I love, I really like, I like horror, and I like police procedurals, But whether these stories are in the form of, being passed on verbally, or dance, or music, or art, music, or television, we want to be transported, and we want to learn new things, and we want to be entertained. But on the other side of that fence are the people who are doing the creating. And we have a responsibility to be honest. And it's not just to be honest to, our audience, but about who we are. And unfortunately, there are so many people right now who are claiming to be Native writers, and they are not. And again, when I first started off talking, I said, this is what I've been consumed with all day long, but it's almost like it is getting worse. That a lot of Native writers who are really so good and talented, they're being pushed to the back in favor of these non-Native writers. But those non-Native writers apparently have, they go with big publishing houses that have publicists with a heck of a lot of money to promote them. And I think this is why people oftentimes can't tell the difference between who is who. So anyway, those are just some of my ideas. And this is why I write the way that I do. Everything I write is of personal meaning to me. I cry a lot when I write. I cry a lot when I do readings, but I think that's the way it should be, and I wouldn't trade it. So if anybody has questions, go right ahead.
Yes, Devin, we have 2 questions that were brought in through the chat. First was, thank you for the library for hosting this and what you're presenting. You are a new author to this writer and can't wait to read the books. And I will do a little plug. We do have the Haddock Witches and Dance at the Return, Recovering Our Ancestors' Garden, Ned Christie's biography, and the Indigenous Food Sovereignty available to check out at the library. So you can check those out. I did do a little plug there. Recently, this writer, or this question, read a book by an American Native author who has published numerous books. On the copyright page of a fiction book, there was a comment that nothing in this book is true. If authors write what they know, how can nothing be true, even for fiction?
I don't know. If we're talking about, are we talking about a Native American author? I don't know who it is. But a Native author can write about something completely in left field. I mean, they could be writing about something that takes place on Mars, just because you're a native writer or a native painter or a sculptor, that doesn't mean you have to stick with native topics, right? It's just when you are writing about a native topic, that's when it gets very tricky. And that is when people are going to call you out. And I write for a native audience. This may be why I'm not out there like some other people that I'm not going to name. There is a formula for getting a huge audience, and it usually involves alcoholism and poverty and trauma and all that kind of stuff. And publishers snap that kind of stuff up. And there's a big difference between going through, say, a university publication process and going through a big publishing house. If you get an agent, they submit it to the big publishing house, and you don't go through peer review. If you go through university press, you have to have 3 to 5 people who will read that book, and they will give you some brutal feedback. And a lot of people don't want to do that. But if you go the other direction, man, you can get some big bucks out of it. And probably you've written one of those formula type books. So I'm not really answering the question, but I think it would really depend on, nothing in this book is true. I just wonder who it is and what it is. Because I mean, you could write about anything and not even mention natives. You're not beholden to writing about native stuff just because you're a native person.
Okay.
But I understand what you're saying. I do.
And that perhaps answers this other question. Would you talk about, when you write about Native American culture, what you consider appropriate and inappropriate? Do you consider how your work might serve to raise awareness and educate non-natives about a Native American culture? And I think you kind of spoke to that throughout, but if you want to get more specific.
Yeah, you don't ever reveal ceremony. You just don't talk about that. And I think this is why Rebecca Roanhorse really gets into trouble, because she's not native, for one thing. And the Navajo Nation has made this perfectly clear that things that she's talking about is not appropriate, and they don't want her doing it. You cannot write about those things. And that's a clear line in the sand. Don't do it. But because she makes so much money for her publishing house, she's going to keep on doing it. And I feel perfectly fine calling her out, because she should not be writing anyway, because Roanhorse is not even her name. So I would never in a million years write about my ceremony. So this is why I say what I write about, like in Dance of the Return, there is no renewal dance. I made that up. And I'm not going to write about what takes place in a sweat lodge. I would not do that. And the best gauge for that kind of thing is, what does the tribe think about it? If the tribe says don't do it, don't do it. Full stop.
Right.
And if you keep doing it, then there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
we have another one. So you mentioned that some of the books that have the Netflix streaming services, are you able to work with creators or producers, staff, employees involved with the staff with the show who are native as well? Speaker last week from this Skokomish tribe, I apologize if I said it wrong, highly recommended Alaska Daily because of this. Some of the creators on that show are native.
Well, what I do, I've been meeting every week with the creators of this, Monique Bluehawk series. And until it gets accepted by a network, whether it's Netflix or Hulu or whoever decides they want it, the first step is just to get it accepted. Once it is accepted and then they're ready to throw money at it, then you create your writers table. And then your writers table are the people that you want to hire to be a part of creating this show. And so it would absolutely be native. When you're an author and producers come at you and they say, I want the rights to your book to do something like this, you kind of sign over your life. And you have to be very careful. You have to trust that the people that you are giving your work to are going to listen to you. And the people, the women that I am working with are absolutely tuned into this, and they clearly understand, because they are seeing, like with res dogs, reservation dogs that we all love, even if it's a native writers, native producer, native director, native actors, and it's right there. And I love it, incidentally, because it's only 20 miles from where my father grew up, Muskogee and Okmulgee. You're still going to have people that are going to criticize it. You don't have enough this, you don't have enough that. They want more, more, more. But you really have to be careful that you include the native voices and that you are accurate. I mean, I think probably everybody listening here has seen some really crappy shows. It's like, what? Who approved this? Who wrote this? What the heck is going on here? So yeah, it all comes down to money, honestly. And so this is kind of, I don't know. I just put my trust in them before I signed off. That's really all I can say.
Mhm.
But yeah, I see these other questions. Well, if you're talking about supporting authentic Native authors, well, there's so many that are not. And so this is what is so difficult. If somebody says they are an enrolled citizen of tribe X, Y, or Z, that's a pretty bold statement, and chances are they're not lying about that. If somebody says they are a descendant of, that's a different ballgame. And that's a key word. You want to key in on that. Now, granted, there are some people who truly are descendants, but they don't meet their tribal blood quantum standards to enroll. But 9 times out of 10 these days, when somebody says they're a descendant, they're full of it. They are not Native. We've seen that over and over and over. And then Native ancestry determined DNA, that does not determine a specific tribe at all. That only determines a specific area where your family background was, perhaps. It's not going to tell you if you are Lakota or Choctaw or Meskwaki or something like that. It cannot be detailed by any means at all. Only tribes determine who their members are, who their citizens are, and that is because you can trace your background to an ancestor within that tribe. So, and it's just very, it's very specific. If you think you're Cherokee, then you better have all of that data and all of that information to send into the tribal registrar. Otherwise, you're not going to get any place. So.
If we still have time for a couple more questions, you mentioned the differences between writing fiction and nonfiction, and you mentioned, like, with nonfiction, there's an end. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is why I love nonfiction. I don't like, the created stories. Mm-hmm. But in having said that, to better myself as a librarian, I did listen to the book Haddock Wishes on audio, and
you did.
I did.
She's a great narrator, isn't she?
She was fantastic, and one part that I was like, oh, this is important for everyone, was using the museum backdrop and what to do with the bones and such. So you've talked about that and the importance of that. So I will recommend that book for sure. But I would be remiss, this is a library program. Have libraries played a part in your life with as far as going to libraries, or do you have any fun library story you'd love to share?
Oh my gosh, do I ever? Well, I was a graduate student in 1984. And so this is when, we were using the card catalog, the long drawer, and you pull it out. And then if they didn't have something, you had to fill out the form by hand for interlibrary loan. And so I was a real library rat. I just spend hours and hours and hours in the library. And those were the days when I could get the original annual reports of the Commissioners of Indian Affairs in the big, huge volumes, like boom, if you drop it, you break your foot, right?
Right.
Nowadays, it's all digitized and you can just, get online and look at it. And those were the days that if you were caught chewing gum in the library, you were booted out. I mean, nowadays you can just eat a full meal while
Yes.
you're looking through the book. I mean, that's
Please clean up after
incredible.
yourself.
Oh my God. So yes, the libraries and haunting the libraries, staying late, that's what we did. And you had to be quiet, and you better be quiet. And I don't know how many of you have been to the University of Kansas, but we have a library, it's called Watson Library. And it's like Hogwarts. It is the strangest, most incredible, huge building. And so you've got level 1, level 2, but then you have a level in between. It's like 1.5, and it stops and you have to crouch over like this. So it's a whole floor of books, thousands of books. So they've got floors in between floors.
Those are the best
Which
kind
I
of
just
libraries.
love it. Libraries are wonderful. They are. I love them.
Well, we do have 3 more questions if you wanted to get to them.
Goodness.
When you were growing up, did you have any mentors? And, right now, do you mentor anyone?
I did not have a mentor. I didn't. My major professor when I was at TCU was Big Don Worcester. And Don Worcester, he was a specialist on Apaches. And he actually was a descendant of Samuel Worcester, who worked with the Cherokees back in the 1830s. Worcester, Cherokee Nation and Worcester. And I didn't have anybody to mentor me. I mean, even when I was an assistant professor, I didn't have anybody to advise me. And I don't mentor anybody. I don't. I mean, and this I was just writing about this earlier this afternoon, that when you call out pretendians, you tend to become the enemy of everybody. So no, I don't mentor anybody. I get a lot of people. I get hundreds of people writing me from other places, grad students asking questions. And I jump on that, and I'm always happy to help immediately. But as far as serving as a mentor, no. My university is just not conducive to doing that. It's pretty bad. But so.
Well, I'm sure in an unofficial capacity, you've mentored someone along the way. If you could buy only one history book about Native Americans in the US, which would be a good one to start with?
Oh my gosh. I would say Waldman. What is the name of that? It's Molly Waldman, and I think her husband did a book, and it's almost like a encyclopedia kind of thing. So it'd be very dry reading, and I use it as reference. So it is broken down into time periods and major events and things that have happened. As far as just sitting down and reading, a book, that's going to be pretty heavy and dense.
Right.
So I really kind of like those encyclopedia books because I like maps and graphs, and I like little snippets and on this date, and then here's another date, and then the next year. I like those. So it's Waldman. And you can probably, Catherine, figure out which is the most recent issue of that. In novels, if there are no notes, how are readers to know what is true and what isn't? Well, you don't. You have to trust that the writer that you have chosen, is going to be an honest writer. Like Louise Erdrich, for example. If you read Louise's stuff, you know that the things that she writes are true. I mean, it's fiction, but it's based on things that she knows. So she's not going to come up with something just really bizarre and strange. So I think it's more of a case of picking the honest author, and then you're going to be on the right track, probably. But you don't expect that a fiction novel, that like the museum that they're writing about is like an exact museum that actually exists. because I create something out of thin air. Like they didn't have a children's museum. Well, I just created one. But I think it's the situations and the cultural aspects is what you have to pay attention to. And that's the important thing, I think.
Well, I think we're close to your time. Thank you so much again. Like I said, I've come from the Southwest and I'd love to, not, I know you're in Kansas, but it's great to like bring this side of this topic. And like you said, sometimes when you talk about Native topics, they're very heavy. And I appreciate that you kind of have the spectrum in your books, and just you're an honest author. So you write what you know.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation. I hope that I just shed a little bit of light on some of this, and I will say what I think, and I offend some people, and I realize that, but I also just hope that that maybe those of you that are listening to this, that when you do decide you want to write about Native people, just look at the people that you're going to pick. There's some wonderful, fantastic authors, and you can't go wrong with some of them, I think.
Well, thank you to all of our attendees. This recording will be available on our website, and that is the library.arlingtonva.us. And please look at our calendar of events. There's a lot of great opportunities, and we have our last author for the Arlington Reads series with Andrea Elliott this Thursday. So thank you again to all of our attendees, and thank you again,
Thank
Dr.
you.
I apologize for saying it incorrectly earlier.
That's fine. Have a good night, y'all.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.